Hey, y'all. Hey. Happy Tuesday evening, or if you're in Australia, Wednesday morning. Is that right? I'm not good with time zones. Honestly, I always get it messed up. How's everybody doing tonight? If you're chatting, I can't see you, so somebody say something. Otherwise, I'm going to get a complex. I'm going to feel weird if I don't see it. Somebody say hi. It's making me nervous. I see 8 people, but nobody's chatting, and it's weirding me out. All right. So today was the defense's thank you in 5678. I was struggling there. Whew, I feel better now. So today was the defense's chance to present their closing arguments in the George Washington Wagner IV trial. And also it was the state's opportunity to give a rebuttal. And there's everybody. Hi, Bethy Cakes. Hi, Corky. Good to see you. I was worried. I mean, I know there are people watching like that. I can see, but it always unnerves me when nobody's chatting. Especially if I haven't really said anything yet. Like, if you guys go quiet when I'm on one of my rolls or whatever, then I'm like, okay, they're just being quiet because they're intently listening, right? But when I haven't really said anything and nobody's talking, then I get a complex. I'm a mess. So, okay, this is how the day ended today. I feel like it was probably maybe 6:37. I think they were still I think is when they finally adjourned. Hey, Amelia, good to see you, babe. For the day, the jury will not be sequestered, okay? And they have the 12 jurors, and then they have 5 alternates, okay? So nobody is going to be sequestered. And the alternates have to come every single day that the jury that the jurors come, the 12 jurors come, right? But they're not allowed to be in the same room as the 12 jurors. And then if one of them is needed, then the deliberations have to start all over again. So please let them not be needed, because I feel like the deliberations are going to be a minute. I really do. I just don't think that, I think that so much evidence was presented, and we're talking about a life sentence without the possibility of parole, right? I think that there's no way that the jurors won't deliberate for a minute. I feel like after today, especially after the jury instructions, I think, see, today's Tuesday. They won't really start deliberating until Wednesday. I think that we will have a verdict by either late Thursday or early Friday. And see, the reason why I think that it's going to take a little bit longer is because let's just be honest. Jurors are human beings, right? It's not like they put you up in the swankiest hotels. Let's be real here, okay? The state is on a budget, all right? You're not getting a 5-star hotel. Just is what it is. And but being sequestered is more than that. Like, you have no access to anything. Okay, you can't look at your phone, can't read the newspaper, you can't do anything. And if there's any TV or movie watching, right, there's probably very few choices available. And then on top of it, everybody has to agree on what they watch. This is, plus you're also, back and forth for, deliberating and stuff like that, right? It's not ideal situation at all. It's kind of miserable. And I think that the upside to them not being sequestered is that they get to go home at night, which that is, I think, probably a good thing in a way, so that they, don't rush through deliberation in order to be done. Do you know what I mean? So we'll see. But I'm going to guess that we're talking late Thursday, early Friday. That's my guess for for the verdict. I do think though that they are going to find him guilty. I would be very, very surprised, especially after today's closing arguments. And I'll tell you why I changed my mind after the closing argument state, not just from the defense, but also from the rebuttal, because one of the things that I had not actually thought about, which should have been the very first thing that I thought about, is I haven't watched every single second of this trial. And again, I also missed the main that they weren't the star witnesses, but they were important witnesses. We didn't get to hear Jake and Angela's testimony, right? So we don't actually know what all the things that they said and what weight they would give it and all that stuff. So after the rebuttal today from the state, I felt much, much better about I think that, to be perfectly fair, I think that the defense did raise some reasonable doubt, which is their job. But I think that by the end of the state's rebuttal, that reasonable doubt, if there is any, it's like if you think about a door, right, being either all the way open, that's reasonable doubt, or shut completely closed, no reasonable doubt. I would say that it's like it's shut, but not pushed shut, if that makes sense. So, like there's a crack. You don't have to really do very much to, you know, close the door, as it were. So, um, let's see here. Let me find this. All right. Now I have to rewind it because I watched it earlier. Oh, and y'all, I might actually be even more convinced now. Now I'm thinking that Law and Crime is also listening to what I say, because what did I say last night repeatedly? Law and Crime, put your closed captionings, make sure that they're set right. I know that you can do it for long lives, but you have to check it, right? Brace yourselves, y'all. Closed captions are on. I'm telling you, I seriously think that they might be listening to me, or BCI somebody. Hell, I don't know. Should I start covering my TV? When I get on the phone, should I run the water and stuff? I don't understand the covering the TV part. I'm not going to even lie. That made no sense to me. What is that even about? Hold on, let me. Also, don't you guys, we're going to have to skip around a lot because after I got off of the live, I had a little bit of lunch, played a little Matchington, and then to be quite honest with y'all, I fell asleep until like 5 o'clock. And then I had to make dinner. And so basically, hey, Allie, good to see you. I don't want you to be upset. So I fell asleep till 5. Then I had to make dinner, right? Then I had to eat dinner. Then I went over to Parker's because she was talking about Delphi and the affidavit, the probable cause affidavit that was released today, which is interesting. And so, bottom line, basically, is I didn't like timestamp any of the interesting parts. So that's that. So, are y'all ready? All right, hold on. Let me just, I can't get him to the beginning for whatever reason. Give me just a second. But we have closed captioning. So I'd like to shout out Law and Crime. Thank you so much. It makes it so much easier, especially with this gentleman, because bless his heart, Mr. Parker is just not real great at staying in the vicinity of the microphone. All right, so here's how it starts. All right, here we go.
Thank you very much. Mr. Trump, County Prosecutor, Prosecutor Wilson, Prosecutor Pinappa. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much for all your patience and your sacrifice. It has not gone unnoticed.
Oh, let me pause you real quick, Mr. Parker. Sorry. Hey, Amelia, would you guys like for me? Not tonight, obviously, because I like to have, like I like my thumbnails and my titles and stuff to like actually match the content that I'm providing. Because I appreciate that. You know, I don't like to be surprised. I don't like to think I'm getting one thing and getting another. Like the time that I opened up the pack of original favorite Skittles, and I thought that the green was going to be lime because that's what it had been for the last 87 years of my life, and it was green apple, so, like that. So, yeah. Would you guys like me to talk about that? Because we can if you want to. I find it fascinating, but just let me know. Don't let me push play because I don't want to talk too much over because we're all going to have to fast forward through him just a little bit. Unless you guys want to watch the whole thing again, we can. It's up to y'all.
I know that each of you have paid very close attention throughout this case, and we rely upon your collective memories to determine what the facts are. You determine the facts, right? That's why you're here, if you can.
All right, cool.
So I'm going to make several.
I'll do it, absolutely. If you guys want me to do it, I will.
To offend any of you,
y'all want to do it tomorrow night?
Please hold that against me.
Yeah, I'll do it tomorrow night.
The same goes for Mr. Nash. You know, you folks.
Aw, Corky. You guys are great. All of you, Allie, Amelia, Corky, 5, 6, and 5, 6, 7, 8.
You folks
guys are all great.
Stand between the power of the government and the man named George Wagner. The government's very powerful. You've seen that.
Bethy Cakes, you're great too.
To work on a case.
I don't want to leave anybody out.
They can gather. You can see the power they have to place listening devices wherever they want, pretty much. Okay. So you've seen the power of the government. And in this particular case, they've overreached when it comes to George. And it's people like you that stand between the government and George. All right. And you will determine whether the state has proven their case with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's what they're determined. They've proven their case with evidence beyond a reasonable doubt. All right. You're not here to solve the mystery. You've seen such a tragedy, right? I mean, it's unspeakable. And there are many facts that we, the defense, have not disputed. All right. Many facts are not in dispute. But there are certainly some that are, and that's why you're here. All right. You know, there's a courtroom I've been in only once or twice, but it made an impression on me because
since we have the closed captionings, I'm going to speed him up just a little bit. Also, I'm going to skip past this personal account of other courtrooms because honestly, who cares?
Just to reassure you, you will have copies of the judge's instructions with you, so you can reference those. A lot of legal terms, obviously, but you will have copies of the instructions. So don't freak out when he's giving you all these terms and everything, because you'll have that to study and look at if you need to. I'm sure you will. But, you know.
No, and 5, 6, 7, 8. This is the defense.
Our country has this system that's been in place for over 200 years now, right? Our court system.
I might have sped him up a little too much. Hold on. Let me slow you down, Mr. Parker. You're out of no.
That's where most where many of our forefathers, founding fathers came from. So they based our court system on that. And what I find interesting about that is in Scotland, they used to have 3 verdicts in criminal cases.
Yeah, I find under
The state in this case that you have
other circumstances, I would find this fascinating.
paint with broad brush. All right. How many times have we heard they, them, you guys, the Wagners? All right. George is the one that's on trial here. All right. We are not here to defend Billy. We are not here to defend Angela. We're simply not here to defend Jake. All right. And basically, I mean, there were days and days that went by when you didn't hear George's name. And that's significant. George wasn't even a suspect in this case, right? They went and interviewed Billy. They went and interviewed Jake and Angela several times. They never interviewed George till they stopped up the Montana border when he was in the car and they separated out everybody. Did they ever seize his phone? No. He wasn't a suspect because he didn't have a motive in this case. And you'll recall his testimony about when he was stopped at.
I'm going to stop you right there, Mr. Parker. First of all, that's not entirely true that he didn't have a motive. Okay, that's completely misstating things. But whatever. The truth of the matter is that initially they thought that it had something to do with the grow operation because that is what stood out, right? If somebody has something illegal going on in their home, right, then obviously who does illegal things? Criminals, right? So that was a distraction from the jump, right? And it took them a minute to get over that distraction. But the reason that your client wasn't interviewed initially isn't because they didn't think he had a motive. They were trying to piece it together because Billy had sent them off on 11 billion wild goose chases. And it wasn't until they started comparing interviews of other people who knew the Wagners that they recognized that there was some discrepancies going on, specifically with Jake. And that's how it started. It was a slow build. So if they had rushed, you'd have something to say about that too. All right. Let's just push play. This dadgum widget. I don't know why it does this. I don't know how to move it either.
You're a suspect or you're a police.
Oh, cripes. I forgot. We're back to this.
So what are you? Obviously,
we know what the charges are. We're going to skip him a little bit.
A motive, Jake allegedly had a motive, Angela allegedly had a motive, Billy maybe a motive, maybe he's taking each, of his family's bizarre sexual beliefs here about Sophie. There's no evidence that poor girl was ever abused. George had absolutely no motive whatsoever, right? And let's talk about George for a minute. He didn't get along with his family like the state is portraying. He testified about that, right? But he turned 16, he got his license, he was out of there as much as he possibly could. He was arguing with his brother, he's arguing with his mom, he even got in fistfights with his dad. All right? He couldn't stand Jake's personality. He spent as much time away from them as he possibly could. Now, did they live together? Yes. Did they work together? Yes. That doesn't mean they liked each other or agreed with each other. And, he was raised in this family that's really hard to even describe, right? It's a quagmire. He couldn't get out of it. Mr. Roten was an important person in his life. That's a gentleman from Virginia who used to hunt up on Bethel Hill. All right. He tried to talk to George about, you need to change your lifestyle so you're not looking over your shoulder all the time. That didn't sink in immediately, but it eventually did sink in. That and the birth of his son, all right, made a big difference in his life. He was a young man at that point. He didn't have any teachers as role models. He didn't have any coaches. He didn't have the parents of friends that he could look up to. He was pretty much socially isolated there. And you have to look at this evidence from George's point of view. He thought his family was being framed. That's what Angela told him. That's what Jake told him. Billy said it was Skid Montgomery, right? But Jake and Angela said they were being framed. So you have to look at this evidence from his point of view. And especially, I think, when you listen to these recordings, okay, and I'm sure you will, you heard some of them. And listen, think about it from his point of view that he doesn't know what his family did. He can't believe it. Yeah, they're thieves. They've got a weird lifestyle, no question about it. All right. But it's one thing to do that versus killing 8 people in the middle of the night that you know, love, or any other people. That's a large leap. So when you listen to those recordings, Listen with an ear that he didn't know this had happened. And I think a lot of those conversations take on a different meaning. He thought they were being framed. And at the BCI, when BCI interviewed him in Montana, he told you, they said at the end of the interview, you're a suspect. We're your witness. Can you help us out? And he confronted Jake. I mean, yeah, okay, I've been stopped at the border. BCI is obviously after our family. He knows that. All right, now it's really sinking in. And he's like, Jake, do you have something to do with this? He said he asked his brother if he had anything to do with this after the Montana interview.
Well, again, the jury will use its collective memories to determine what the evidence is. This is argument, so you may go ahead.
George testified that he confronted his brother after the Montana interview. Did you have anything to do with this? And Jake swore up and down he didn't. And George believed it. And, with respect to Montana, there was a lot of really, the prosecutor asked George a lot of questions about, didn't you say this in Montana? Didn't you say this in Montana? What about this in Montana? Did you hear the recording from Montana? No, they didn't play it. Did they bring in an agent from Montana to say, did George say this, this, and this? No, they didn't. Why? Ask yourself why they didn't. You heard Angela's, right? They're all being recorded. And another thing about, goes back to Jake, right? Another thing about Jake, they took this truck they got in Athens County and they did this demonstration, I will call it. You saw the photos, right? When did they do that? After Jake got done testifying. Did they show those photos? Did they do it like after his proffer or anything? In the year and a half or so it's been since he turned state's evidence? Did they show him those pictures? Did they do that in a timely way? It's like, is this how you did it? Was it something like this? No, they didn't. And they want you to believe that he purchased this Colt 1911 that was used at this gun show and George was there, right? Did they ask Jake if George was there? No. They didn't ask Jake if George was there. Do they have photographs from that gun show, from security cameras or anything else, showing them together like they did at Walmart? Do they have any other pictures of George's alleged activity here? They got nothing on George. Other than the word of his lying, watch my language, brother. And his mother, who dragged her own mother into this case. Talk about a piece of work. Angela dragged her own mother into this case. This Boondock Saints video, it's comical. I'm sorry, it is. If they want you to convict based on some Boondock Saints video, it's a joke. They have this video you saw early on in the case. Early on in the case, you saw a video taken from somebody's house out near left fork, out that route. Video of two vehicles going closely in the night. I'm sure you remember that, right? They want you to believe that's related to the murders, right? Going back and forth. Did they show that video to Jake? Say, hey, is that you guys going down the road here? No. Do they have anybody to say it's either this truck from Athens County or Chris's truck in those videos? No, you can't tell what it is. It's two cars going down the road in the middle of the night.
Excuse me, Mr. Parker, I don't want to be rude. Let me just say this. You're not going to get any argument from me, sir, about Angela being a piece of work, or I'm not going to bother at all to extol Jake Wagner's virtues, as I believe he possesses none. Okay, so you're not going to get an argument on me there. But the fact of the matter is, George was busted. It doesn't matter whether he was at the gun show or not. That's really irrelevant, because at the end of the day, those guns belong to that family, period. And George was keenly aware of the guns that each family member owned. So stop playing. And I will say this, Angela Wagner, it was you are low down and foul for dragging your mama into this. For reals, for reals. Like, that's... I mean, I don't know why I would be surprised that she would drag her mother into this, because she look at what she raised. But whatever. At the end of the day, still, there's lines, and one of those lines is mom's. So you're gross for doing that. Get on with it, Mr. Parker.
Something I ask you to consider when you listen to these recordings from the R&L truck, is that George was, and Jake both, but they were cross-country truck drivers. George was up all night, or up most of the time, I should say.
Mm-hmm.
He drove at night, right? He was a
Mhm.
night driver. Lots of caffeine, very little sleep, very irritable. I can understand how people's personality changes for 2, 3, 4 days, practically no sleep, and you're loading up on caffeine. All right, your personality is going to be a little bit different, especially when you think he's framing your family for these murders. I ask you to take that into some context.
Yes, quirky. Like,
There are
I try to talk
stipulations
about
that you will have
kind
that
of
we
stuff.
agreed
Now, my
to.
youngest daughter, she is fascinated by true crime, and we talk about it. But that's only here and there when I can get her because she has a very active social life. I mean, it is what it is. So, I love coming in here and talking to you guys about this kind of stuff. All this stuff fascinates me. Every single aspect of true crime. I think, though, that what I really, really, really love the most about true crime are the trials, because I do like um, seeing all of the evidence laid out and all of that stuff. So that's my favorite. All right, here we go.
With the state, a lot of it has to do with blood evidence, all right? You'll remember that. There's also some concerning George's weight over the years, and there are medical records here which support these stipulations. George was a very large guy.
Yeah, George was a pork chop. We get it. So was his
280
dad.
pounds is not unusual for him, all right? Take that into consideration. Consider the bodies, all right? Take that into consideration. If you think he was in the back of that truck for an hour, I think is what Jake said, from the time they left Leaders Road until they got out, something like that, 20 minutes, 40 minutes, 60 minutes, something in that time frame. If you think George,
Oh, I'm glad to hear that,
if
Allie.
you think they were in the back of that, take this into consideration. Remember Jake's testimony. His dad, I don't know if you believe this or not, but Jake's testimony was, his dad stopped somewhere between Peterson and Union Hill Road, went to the back, and his dad asked me, is what Jake testified to. Dad asked me whether I wanted to go through with this. He didn't ask me and George. He didn't ask us. He asked me.
I'm going to stop you right there, because let me just say this. If Jake had said he asked us, I guarantee you this attorney, Mr. Parker here, would have stood up and objected and said hearsay. Promise you he would have. So there you go. I'm going to skip forward a little bit because I don't know. Mr. Parker's is okay,
George and Tabby,
but the real
Heard a
meat
lot
and
about
potatoes is going to be the rebuttal. But I do want you guys to hear this.
She was hacking away. You'll see in the exhibits, she kept a notebook with everybody's name and social security numbers and passwords and phone numbers.
Angela would have been great at discussing true crime. Too bad she decided to be a criminal.
Attention to social media and topics. She's the one that after the murders couldn't get her face out of that and was telling George and anybody that would listen that they're being framed, even though she knew what had really happened. Chris Newcomb, you heard from him, right? George's uncle, technically more like a brother to him, about the same age. That was kind of George's role model, right? About a year or two older than George, kind of taught him how to smoke, how to cuss, how to chase women. That was like his buddy, his role model, right? Was around, trading. Just knew it. He saw methods.
Build the thing. What has happened here?
You know, talk about a lot of
I don't know what the internet's doing tonight.
Right. And in his circle of friends and family, these guns, I compared them to like a $20 bill or a $50 bill, right? They're almost like money. They trade them for this, trade them for that. I like this one. I'll have this for 2 weeks. I'll get another one. You heard about trade days. You heard about, I'll trade a guy has a junker in his yard. I'll give him 2, 3 guns, get the junker, chop it up and sell it for money and make money. That's what was going on here. This SKS that they found, Jake testified about that SKS. That had been in the family, I think he said, for 10 years or more. It was just as much his as it was George's. And George testified, he's had more SKSs than he can count. I mean, he's a gun guy. He trades guns all the time. And they never asked him where his SKS was. He testified. He sold it to Ben McCann. You hear anything to the contrary on that?
Yeah, but it wasn't his SKS that was used. He just used an SKS, right? Yeah.
You get an instruction from the judge, you have a copy of it, and the law requires you to view Jake and Angela's testimony with grave suspicion. That's the phrase. Grave suspicion.
Probably don't do air quotes.
sure
I
you
missed
do
this the first go round.
I think
Oh,
after
for pity's
viewing the
sake.
testimony,
I hate
with
turning
grave
on
suspicion,
subscribers only, but you're going to make
here's
me
something
do
I'm
it.
sure
The
you
bots are
see
making me
I'm sure
do
it's
it.
even up there.
Sorry, you guys. Let me turn it on subscriber only.
We could offer him nothing for his testimony.
Give me just a
Vigorously
second.
cross-examined. You saw his demeanor. Compare that to his mother. His mother wouldn't even look at it. His mother wouldn't even look at it. And Jake was laughing and smiling and smirking when he talked about the murders. You're going to believe those people? Proof beyond a reasonable doubt? The most important of your affairs? At the fourth thing, the judge was up there. Don't forget that Jake said he had no intent to kill. Right? Hold on a second. He was there to protect Jake from Crazy Billy. Jake was a jealous young man. I think he's a deeply disturbed young man. To commit these crimes, you have to be deeply disturbed, right? There's no testimony George is the shooter. There's no reliable testimony that he's there. To look at the timeline that Jake describes and compare it to the phone records. And what the phone records don't show when people were killed, but they do show when people were alive.
No, they don't. They
And if you
show
look at
when the
timeline
phone
that
was
Jake
used.
describes, they don't match up. And there's a large amount of time that's completely unaccounted for. He says they left 9 o'clock-ish at Peterson Road. They don't come back till daybreak, roughly. All right, what is that? 9 hours, something like that. He's at Chris's, probably scene one, probably the longest amount of time, but not a long time. Claims that his dad is jiggling on the doorknob over Frankie's at midnight or so. But Frankie and Hazel Billy were still alive based on the phone records. They would have heard something between hours now. They would have heard something that didn't happen. Dana was texting at 3:30 in the morning. According to Jake, she's already dead. So I implore you to look at what is reliable evidence, what is not reliable evidence. Jake and Angela are not reliable by any stretch of the imagination. This has to be proof beyond a reasonable doubt. There's all kinds of reasons to doubt that George knew about this or was involved before or after or that he was even there. He got up here and testified. Compare his demeanor to Jake and Angela. I could go on forever on this case, right? There are a million things to talk about. I probably missed some things that you think are very important. That doesn't mean they're not.
I'll
The only
probably
thing that's important is what you think.
finish it tomorrow too,
So look at the
Corky,
evidence.
because I
Take time
definitely
to
want to talk about
understand
it.
Look at it from George's point of view. All right? Look at it from his point of view.
I don't think that's the way evidence works. I think you're just supposed to look
As
at
soon
the
as I sit down, I know there's
evidence.
going to be something I wish I would have said, but I think you understand the defense position here.
Yep, yep,
I ask you to,
we do.
seriously, I ask you to return a verdict of not guilty to all charges. All charges. George wasn't even up there. He told you that. There's nothing credible here to say otherwise. Now, the state will never believe that. I don't have to give them a step for you. All right. But you took an oath. You followed that oath. You people have been tremendous. Your dedication. You persevered through our delays, through other circumstances. We appreciate that. Hold the state to their burden of proof. Remember what we talked about in what you were. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Jake is gone for the rest of his life, thank goodness. Angela, you need that deal with her. George didn't do this. He wasn't there. It's not in his nature. He is different from Jake. He is different from Angela. And he got up here and told you so. What more could he do? Confident you'll come back with a not guilty verdict after discussing it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Parker.
Thank you. Does the state of Ohio have rebuttal argument?
Yes, Your Honor, thank you.
Oh, yes, we do. And here it comes. Y'all brace yourselves. Crap. I forgot. Let me look up this attorney's name because remember I said I was going to do that and then I forgot. Let me look it up. Hold on. What is this on my phone? Something got spilled. Gross.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Parker said something in his closing argument that absolutely destroyed not only the credibility of his argument, but the entire defense in the case. He stood up before you and he said, my client didn't do anything. You can't believe a word that Jake's saying. He's completely innocent. He didn't go up there. But if you believe Jake, he didn't shoot anybody. He didn't have the intent to do it. You can't have it both ways. You can't have it both ways. It's either, the truth is either one or the other. You can't argue both. There's a saying in football that if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. And what that saying means is if you're trying to play two quarterbacks as part of your offense, you don't have a credible offense. That you're desperately trying to do anything you can to make something work. And that same rule applies here. If you're trying to put forth two defenses, it shows that you have no credible defense. It shows that you're doing anything you can to throw something against the wall, make it stick. To plant something in your mind. No, don't worry about the truth. To plant something in your mind, in one of your jurors' minds. Don't make you think, I don't know. Right? And the reason they do that, the reason that's done is because he is guilty. He's guilty. He's guilty of the aggravated murder of Chris Seaman. He's guilty of the aggravated murder of Gary. He's guilty of the aggravated murder of Hannah, Hazel, and Frankie. He's guilty of the aggravated murder of little Chris, of Hannah, and of Dana. And he is guilty of the murder of Ken. Now look, there's been no direct testimony that he actually pulled the trigger in any one of those murders. But you better believe he's up to his eyeballs in it with this thing. As they plot, as they prepare, as they execute, as they cover up those murders, he's in it up to his eyeballs. And when he put on those dark clothes the night of this murder, when he put on that ski mask, when he left that house with his brother and his father and his mom saw him walk out, you know that at that moment, the plan was for him to get in the back of that truck and for him, actually, to kill Chris. And how do you know that? Right? How do you know that? He had the SKS and Jake had the 22. And any of you sitting here in this jury box who knows anything about guns knows that if you're going to kill someone at distance, at night, possibly a moving target, you aren't using a little 22 pistol. You aren't using a little 22 pistol with iron sights. No. When you're going to snipe somebody like that, you're using a high-powered rifle. You're using a rifle. Right? You're using something that's going to put that target down, preferably with one shot. Because guess what? If you don't put them down with one shot, the plan goes awry at that point. Things can go bad really quick. And who had the SKS? And Jake tells us that when they were laying there on the ground outside of Chris's house, and everything up to this point is going according to plan, for one reason or another, he didn't shoot. He didn't squeeze that trigger. And again, we don't know. Jake doesn't know why he didn't squeeze the trigger. Was that silencer on the end of the barrel was too big? Could he not get a good shot? Was there a problem? They were walking back from that grow house. Was there a problem with him moving? Was Billy too close? Or did he just check out? Did he just I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to squeeze the trigger. I don't want to be the one to squeeze the trigger. All right? We don't know. We don't know what happened. And Jake tells you that when that happened, again, eventually he takes that SKS from his brother. Dad comes back out and, hey, what the heck is going on? You know, we agreed to do this. He takes that SKS. Dad says, I'm going to try to get him, somewhere where you can shoot him. And under the guise of, hey, I can't find my phone. All right, under the guise of, I can't find my phone. Can you call my phone? They get Chris to the inside, right that front door.
Yeah, he was.
All the evidence to see.
Why can't I find what his name is, though?
And when Jake sees him inside that front door, Jake shoots. And do you remember Do you remember
D. Andrew Wilson
remember
is
how
his name. Mr.
Jake
Wilson.
described how he shot? He said he took that first shot,
Found it.
and then he said he closed his eyes and just started squeezing. Now, he said he didn't know how many times he shot, but ultimately, we know on that porch area, there's
Sorry
6
about your friend,
ballistic events
Amelia.
outside the house.
Awful.
We recovered 6 7.62 tool ammo shell casings. In those
I try
boxes.
to make y'all smile.
So he shot 6 times. He shot 6 times. And these are the holes in the front of the house. And look at those holes. All right? That's a pretty tight shot group. When you look at the way Jake described what he did, that's a pretty tight shot group. He hasn't really thrown any of those shots too far. I mean, there's nothing really over on the other side of the porch or up high or low. That one on the left, he threw that one a little bit, but again, that one tumbled. So it hit something on the porch when it came through, but that's a tight shot group. For a guy whose night vision is allegedly terrible, for a guy who told you that he closed his eyes and squeezed the trigger when he shot, that's a pretty tight shot group. That's the kind of shot group you'd see from somebody who's got good night vision, who's somebody who sees well
This
at
is my
night,
favorite
somebody
part.
who we know hunts all the time at night with a rifle, somebody who prides himself on being a good shot with a rifle. But Jake, when he came in here, he took a stand and he told you, first thing out of his mouth, all right, I love my brother. I don't want him to be convicted of this. Jake wants you to find his brother not guilty. That's what he wants out of this. And Jake tells you, again, that he didn't pull the trigger. Now, you know from his testimony that we pushed him on that. That when he was interviewed.
Okay. Now that I've watched this for the second time, I have some different remarks to make on this part. This is my favorite part because I do think that Jake is lying about this part. I don't believe that it was Jake taking those shots. I actually believe that it was George because it doesn't make sense for the person who is the least adept at shooting to be doing the shooting, right? It's dark. He has problems at night, yada, 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 right? And on top of it, he said he closed his eyes. I do think that this is oh, do I? Wonder why. Is it better now? I shouldn't be choppy. Might just be the Wi-Fi. Let me give it a minute. See if it gets better. Just make sure everything's plugged in the way it needs to be. Hang on a second here. Everything is it should be. Is it better? Okay. It's not choppy for you, Corky? Okay. So this is a part where I noticed it today, obviously, because these are things that I pointed out. Like I wanted Angela Canepa to point this out to the jury, but I'm glad that Mr. Wilson has picked up the baton and is now carrying the team, right? So I think that this is the point where Jake did cover for George. I think that Jake is telling the truth about the victims, the other victims that he unalived. I think he is telling the truth about unaliving Hannah, wrote Hannah Mae and Dana. I think he's telling the truth about those, but this one, I don't think he's telling the truth about, and I think he is covering for his brother. That I will say. That part I actually agree with, and it's interesting to me because remember when there was that back and forth exchange between the prosecution and the defense about and Angela Canepa said that they were arguing the evidence and they were arguing over the photos being shown, and Angela said, but there is contention over who fired the guns. I was wondering, and I remarked about that because that's, they weren't, the defense was saying there's tons of stipulations. We're not arguing about this evidence. We know that this occurred, right? This is not the issue. And she said, but the who fired what weapon is actually what did she say? Is a bone of contention, or something to that effect. I think this is why. I think Jake covered for George right here. Okay.
We can believe him. And if ever there was a chance, if he was really wanting to throw his brother under the bus, like they allege, that was it right there. I mean, he could, if he was lying about what his brother did, that's where you throw him under the bus, right there. But he didn't. He fully talked about how his brother had participated and all the things that you heard that his brother did with respect to help him prepare the back of the truck, going up there with the intent to shoot, carrying the SKS, all of that stuff. He talked about all of that stuff. But he said, my brother didn't pull the trigger. And again, when you're weighing whether or not he's trying to throw his brother under the bus, you have to look at that. So because Jake says that, we don't have any direct testimony that this defendant was a principal offender with respect to those murders, that he actually was the one that pulled the trigger. But guess what? Under Ohio law, it doesn't matter. We're going to get instructed on the law here in a second. And he didn't have to pull the trigger once to be guilty of any of these aggravated murders. You see, the way
Amelia, you're good.
concept of complicity in Ohio is that more people.
I don't want to interrupt you, Mr. Wilson, but I'm going to skip through this because we get how complicity works. This is a good instruction for the jury. Like, it's important the jury understands this, but we understand it. So I'm not going to make you guys sit through this again. But what I will say is, I thought that Angela Canepa was the only special prosecutor. She isn't. Mr. Wilson here is also a special prosecutor. And why they didn't use him for opening, I will never understand. We're going to skip through the 20 things that George did that proves that he was complicit, and that the fact the way that the law reads, the statute reads, he only had to do one of those things to be considered complicit, and he did like 20, but that was just the 20 he named. That wasn't everything that he did. So we're going to skip through that part because we don't need to hear all that.
There in Kennis, something goes south, right? You need to have that other truck parked up the road because now it's too far to walk all the way back. It's too far to walk back to that truck you have at scene one. You need to bring that truck as a potential escape. So if something goes south at Kennis, you can beat feet, you can get in that truck with George, and you guys can go on home. Right? And that's what he did. That's what he did. He was down the road, and we see those two trucks leaving on that camera. You see them. Again, when you look at it, and when he asked you, well, why would you use that truck? When you step back and look at it, it makes perfect sense. You cannot, shortly after the murder, strip out of your clothes that you used, hand them to somebody knowing that they're going to be destroyed as evidence. You cannot help your co-defendant dig a hole, knowing that evidence from the murders is going to be buried in that hole. You cannot, shortly after the murders, buy a replacement pistol to take the place of one that you either destroyed or used in nothing. You cannot come up with a case. We're trying to keep aided and abetted. That's our theory of the case. And the reason I want to talk to you about that is, again, about the murders. You'll see that he's charged as the principal offender in counts 1 through 8, which are the aggravated murder. And the language in that, I'll paraphrase for you, but it's set up as a principal offender. So on or about April 22nd, 2016, in Pike County, or in the course of conduct in Pike County, George Wagner.
Really, Mrs. M? That's interesting. I'm curious why. Maybe because, and I will say this for Angela Canepa, okay, to be fair. She does know this case very, very well. And she's also an excellent attorney. She knows the law. But her strong suit is not opening statements or closing arguments, and that's just my opinion. And I think there were probably, I don't know, 100 or so people, maybe more, in the in the long crime chat that agreed that it's not that she's not a good lawyer. She's an excellent lawyer. She's good at her job. She's just not good at opening and closing statements. And not everybody is. So that's what I think, you know. But yeah, let me I'm gonna mute and be right back. But I'll be in the chat. All right, here we go.
Did with prior calculation time purposely cause the death of another. That's the way it'll be set up. All right. Now, it's important because it's written in the principal language, it can get confusing. When you look at that, you're like, well, he didn't pull the trigger, all right? So he didn't purposely cause the death of anybody. But if you go to the back, to the end of these instructions, one of the last things the judge is going to instruct you on is complicity. And you'll see that complicity applies to every count in this indictment. And ultimately, when you go back and deliberate how you do it, that's for you. But I'm going to give you a suggestion, all right? I would suggest that somebody, if not all of you, take the complicit language out of this stack, because it's a big stack. And as you go through each offense or each count, have the complicity set aside and apply it to each offense. So when you read the count, read it along with complicity, and then say, hey, look, did he do the things in complicity as applied to this count? It's important. It's important because even though each of these counts is written as the defendant is the principal offender, if you apply the complicity language to the count and you find beyond a reasonable doubt that he was complicit, that he aided and abetted, then he's guilty of that count. And if he's complicit, then anything the principal offender, if he aided and abetted, anything the principal offender did with respect to that count is imputed to him. That's the way the law works. And that's our theory of this case with respect to the murders. Now, I spent a long time talking to you about complicity and the law of complicity. I want to talk for a second about the theme or theory of this case. Can you pick that up? All right. I want to talk to you about the theme or theory of the case. Mr. Parker spent some time talking about the theme or theory of the case. And I want to put a picture up for you. There it is right there. Now, look. When you first heard about these murders, all right, even before you were a potential jury member, when you heard about these murders out in the community, I'm sure, just like Mr. Parker argued, in your head, somewhere along the way, you're like, nah, there's no way this could be about custody. Nah, there's no way you murdered 8 people over the custody of a child. Nah, surely you would do something else if you really wanted to have custody of a child. I want you to look at this picture. Man, this picture speaks volumes. It speaks volumes. Now, that picture was taken after the murders. How do we know? Well, Jake looked at it, and he told us it was after the murders. But look at Billy's hand. He's holding a little one there. So if you look at his hand, he's got the scorpion tattoo. And we know he got that tattoo on his trigger finger after the murders. Now, the defense, Mr. Parker stood up here in front of you, and even Angela and Jake, they don't want you to believe that this case is about custody, that these murders had anything to do about custody. But make no mistake about it. Those 2 children in that picture were never going to be raised anything other than Wagner. It wasn't going to happen. And while custody may mean different things to different people, the bottom line is, after these murders, these 2 children lived in the full-time custody and control of the Wagners. Now, to achieve that goal, the goal of raising these 2 children as Wagners, they basically stole Bullvine. All right. Now again, you heard Tabby sign Bullvine, sign this paper. She didn't have a safe place for him when she first left. She wasn't in a good position to take care of him when she first left. But she signed those papers again, understanding that one day she would be reunited with her kid. That one day she would be able to see her kid under her terms. And when it became apparent that she wasn't going to be able to do that, she tried to get him back. But that was never going to happen. It didn't matter If she got a job, it didn't matter. If she lived in a nice clean house, it didn't matter. If she was away from her family, she was never going to have the kind of custody control of her child that she wanted. And if you look at that picture again, while they stole Bullvine, they wiped out an entire family to get Sophie. To achieve that goal, they went to those ends. And the defense wants you, as we look at the theme or theory in this case, the defense wants you to mistake motive with justification. All right, think about that. The way the Wagners justified these killings in their head and amongst themselves is to protect Sophia from being abused.
Okay. I would be too, Mrs. M. I absolutely would be. I said this earlier this morning when I covered when this was live. But I want to say it again because I think it bears reminding, and I think it is an incredibly important point to make. When Mr. Wilson is talking about the special instructions, okay, and explaining them to the jury in the way that he did an excellent job. And I cannot stress how important it is for the jury to understand the instructions that they are being given. Okay, number one. And number two, for in a complicated case, this is a complicated case. There is, aside from that shoe impression in blood, there really isn't any other hardcore direct evidence. It's a lot of circumstantial evidence. Okay. And in this day and age, really, we are used to seeing DNA evidence, which is direct evidence. We are used to seeing hair, fiber evidence. Those are direct evidence, right? So when you don't have that and the case is complex, and on top of it, you're dealing with, this is an unaliving of 8 people. Okay. There's 8 victims here. And when you have a witness who is a co-defendant, right, co-perpetrator, who says that the defendant on trial currently didn't pull the trigger, but as the statute reads, you don't have to pull the trigger to be acting in connection as a principal under the Ohio state statute, right? Which most states have this same statute, okay? Their language might be a little bit different, but it's basically the same thing. The reason why this is so very important is because remember how I was talking about Casey Anthony? And remember how I was telling you guys that I had watched when right after Peacock released the trailer for her show, right? And I said that I watched Vinnie Politan cover it on Court TV and talk about it. Well, with one of his guests that night was the actual judge who presided over Casey Anthony's trial. And he said something to me, or not to me direct specifically, but he said something that to me was enlightening. Now, I have, ever since the verdict was read, although I was disappointed in the verdict, okay, I actually understood it. I understood why the jury found the way that they did, right? But I didn't know this one element because this is the part that I didn't watch, which now I don't always watch them with you guys, the jury instructions, but I do watch them, okay? Because when the jury in Casey's trial was given the jury instructions, okay, with respect to first degree premeditated murder, okay, there was an element that was left out, and it was confusing for the jury. The jury wasn't told that the state did not have to prove cause of death, that they only had to prove manner. Okay. And that is what, after the verdict was read, later on, there were jurors that spoke out. And that is, they did say that it was hard for them to find her guilty of first degree murder. And she was on the hook for the death penalty. because they didn't feel that the state had proven the manner of death. Okay. No, the cause. Sorry, they did prove manner, homicide, but they didn't prove the cause of death. Okay. So, that's why jury instructions are so very, very important. And that's why Casey walked. Had there been an instruction underneath the count pertaining to first degree premeditated murder, that that the state doesn't have to prove cause of death, they would have voted her guilty, and Casey Anthony would be sitting on death row right now, because they would have definitely given her the death penalty. Period. Okay. So that's why this is very important. The next thing that he's about to talk about is also incredibly important. See, it's not a requirement usually for the state to have to prove motive, okay? But they certainly do um, usually offer a motive, okay? Corky, I'm going to answer you in just a sec. I just want to get this out of my brain while it's still fresh, because you guys saw how the struggle was this morning. Whew. And I was all hopped up on caffeine, and I wasn't acting a straight fool, Mr. Wagner. Just saying. Guess we all process caffeine differently. And I also function on very little sleep, which is why I crashed out today and took a nap. Anyway, that's neither here nor there. But this case is about custody in a very broad sense. This family, the Wagners, believed that their way of raising children was not just the right way, it was the only way. Okay. And when George had bovine, and George and Tabitha had bovine, okay, and Angela and George could see that it really wasn't going to work out between Tabitha and George. They, through all kinds of subterfuge and just antics, Mr. Wilson is correct. They did steal bovine out from underneath Tabitha, and that's just the fact. Okay. And it was starting to go that way with Hannah Mae. But the difference in Hannah and Tabitha is, number one, Tabitha came from a very broken home, and she had some stuff that happened to her in her life. And is she strong now? Yes. I'm not talking about now, I'm talking about then. I don't think she knew the amount of strength that she actually had. Okay. But Hannah did. And Hannah was going to be too headstrong. But more importantly, and this is why this whole thing occurred, is that Hannah had the support. She had a huge support system. She had a strong family, and they were her support system. Not only was her family strong, right, but Billy was actually intimidated by the men in the Roden family, specifically Chris Sr. and Kenneth Roden. He was intimidated by them, and they were going to be problematic. Sophie was never going to be raised 100% Wagner with no interference from the Roden family as long as they were around. And that is what happened. And the thing that makes Angela Wagner so very, very dangerous is that George is right. She is a manipulator. Okay. But her brand of manipulating is particularly cunning. Okay. Because Angela is able to manipulate people, but while simultaneously making them feel that it is their idea. So that is illustrated in the audio when she is talking to Jake and they're having the argument about Beth. Okay. and Angela says something to the effect that you and your brother make 90% of the plans. I've been letting you and your brother control things for far too long, and you're not going to insult me. Remember that conversation? Hey, Parker, appreciate ya. That is Angela's brand of manipulation. She is very good at making the getting what she wants, but making the person think that it was their idea. That's why she is so that's what makes her so sinister. Okay, but the one part that she failed in is she did want to have total control. And it was easy for her to have total control over Jake and George because she raised them. But when you bring a new person into the situation, it's difficult, which is why I believe that there was the whole fixing up. Initially, it was going to be Tabitha and her sister, and it was Tabitha was supposed to be introduced and matchmake. The matchmaker was between Tabitha and Jake, and then it was Tabitha's sister and George, right? Because they're all roughly the same age, right? Same years apart, but it didn't work out that way, and this is why I think that Jake was raised by the example of his older brother to look for a younger female, which is why I can't think of a single 17-year-old that I've ever known when I was 17 or any that. I mean, I've raised 4 kids. I've been around 4 sets of 17-year-olds, and I have never seen a 17-year-old have anything in common with a 13-year-old. It just doesn't happen. You know, there was a gap roughly around that between my oldest son and my oldest daughter, right? About 3 years. But and there's 10 months between my boys. So they had the same age group of friends around, right? The boys did. And they treated my oldest daughter like a child. They didn't include her in anything. They didn't want her around. That's typical that age difference behavior. But Jake was raised, groomed, if you will, to seek out a younger, more impressionable girl, right? But where Angela failed in her plan is that she never taught her sons how to treat women. I think that they were never going to ever have control over Hannah, period, the way that they wanted to. The Wagners weren't, because Hannah just wasn't that kind of person. But I think it would have lasted longer. Their relationships would have lasted longer, and Angela would have had control longer. And maybe, to be honest with you, this unaliving wouldn't have happened. But for the fact that Angela never taught her sons how to treat women properly. And when they treated women like they treated Tabitha, like they treated Hannah, like they treated Beth Ann, and not just individually, like Jake treated Hannah bad, but I think George was rude too. I know George was definitely nasty to Beth Ann, and I would imagine that Jake was probably nasty to Tabitha as well. And that's where her plan went sideways. All right, now we're going to play. Because now I've talked too long. I feel like Angela Canepa.
By the roads. But let's be honest. Let's be honest. You know why the Wagners never called children's services? You know why the Wagners never took her to the doctor to look into these sex abuse claims? You know why they never called children's services? Because it wasn't true. It wasn't true. It wasn't true. They made terrible allegations about this family.
Hey, don't do that.
Amongst themselves. On public, because it wasn't true. And how do we know it didn't happen? Because it's the same type of abuse claim they made against Tabby and Beth. It's their playbook. And in the law, we call that common plan or scheme. Right? And you can use common plan or scheme to show intent or motive. And with the Wagners, The common plan or scheme that they use to try to get sole possession of, to get sole control over these kids, is they fabricate claims of abuse against moms or potential moms to push them out of the picture. Now look, it worked. It worked with Tabby. It worked with Beth, but they weren't as strong as Hannah. Hannah wasn't playing that game. Tabby and Beth, they didn't have a support network. Guess who did? Guess who had a whole family behind them? Hannah. And you know what? Her family was never letting his brother, letting his mom take Sophia the way they had taken Holbein. It wasn't happening. And they knew this. The Wagners knew it. As a matter of fact, they were scared of the Rodents. Remember in Billy's first interview back in September, you heard it. You heard it really early in the trial. In his first interview back in September 2016, he tells the investigator something about Chris, like something like, hey, look, if you're going to fight him, you better put him down because he's going to just keep coming at you. He also said something in that same interview, you fight one of the Rodents, you fight them all. All right? That was in their head. They knew what was up. You also heard the recording from Jake's truck. When they were up there doing a custody pickup and he's in the car, he's freaking out. Get out of here. Get out of here before Chris and them get out. No, don't go by the house. Don't go. He's scared. They are scared of the Rodents. And they knew they were never prying Sophie from her family. So what do? They go to their go-to, their fallback, their collective motive of sex abuse. And they use that to justify the claim to protect Sophie. They use that to justify the need to commit murder. And even though protecting Sophie was how they justified their head, and make no mistake about it, their desire to have Sophie and to raise her 100% Wagner was why they did this.
This is the one part where I sort of agree, but at the same time, I kind of disagree with Mr. Wilson here, because there is a moment in George's testimony where he talks about Angela, and that she was, when him and Jake were growing up, how she was constantly worried that somebody was going to kidnap them, and she talked about it frequently. I don't think that I think that for Angela, clearly something happened to her. Okay, I think that's clear. What exactly it was, when it happened, if it happened more than once, I don't know. But something happened to Angela when she was young, period. And it shaped the way that she viewed the world. And she was so hyper focused on abuse, and to the point of paranoia. And I think that the fact is that this is interesting. And I think that Angela might have actually known this about Tabitha or at least suspected it, because hell, she suspected everybody was being abused. So I think that was a draw for Tabitha and her sister to meet Jake. And as warped as that is, I think that she looked for those broken people. Now, I will say, I think that when Jake told his mother what happened to Hannah as a kid, I will say that I think that when Angela heard about it, this is what's so weird. This is what's so interesting to me. I actually think that Angela might have been surprised by it, but I don't think that Angela needed to use, I don't know, I wouldn't exactly say that that it was a justification, right? Or it was, I think what it was is that Angela was hypervigilant and paranoid. And I think I think it goes back to something that happened to her. And so I think that there is a part of Angela Wagner that I think she actually believes. I seriously do. I think she actually believes that Sophie was being abused. I think she actually believes that Beth Ann abused Sophie and potentially Bolvine. What I think that she did was and I think that she played on George more so than anybody because George witnessed firsthand through Tabby the long lasting effects that type of abuse has on a person, and that she would have, moments where they weren't good. And I think that I think that she used that as a weapon. And I think that that's how she got George fired up. That's what I think. I don't think that this was yeah, that's just what I think. And obviously I can't prove it, but just I've watched everything and listened and hearing Angela. She's a sick twist, I'm not going to lie.
If you look at that desire, at their need to
Hey,
raise
Paul
these
G,
children
good to see ya.
the way they
Welcome.
wanted to raise them, to raise these children 100% as Wagner's. And you peel back the idea of the
Yes,
layer,
Allie, that's
the
it.
theme or theory of this case, just one more past custody, you'll see what this case is really about. It's about power and control. It's about control. And think about it in your lives. If you know anyone in your life who has a control issue,
Alice has control
struggles
issues.
with control, could be, again, a family member, boss, ex-boss,
Your
ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, ex-spouse, and the playbook is the same, almost the same every time. And you see it play out in this case, almost textbook. Almost textbook. Often the need to control someone comes from a place of fear. Fear that you're going to lose the person.
Angela.
Fear that you're the only one who can protect the person. Fear that other people will negatively impact your relationship with that person. Fear that the person you're trying to control will like other people more than they like you. And you see that in this case.
Oh yeah, you do. Especially in that audio.
If you think about it, the need to control someone follows a fairly common pattern. What do you see in these situations? Well, the person being controlled is cut off from outside influences. They're cut off from family members, friends, coworkers. The person being controlled is indoctrinated with the controller's beliefs, their values, their norms. The person being controlled is unable to establish their own identity, their own belief system. And the person being controlled is under almost near surveillance or observation. And another trait that you see in these situations, again, with controlling people who are starting to lose control, are scared that they're not going to be able to control the person anymore, is all of a sudden you see them resort to desperate measures. The Wagners need to control how these children, how the grandchildren are going to be raised. That's a group trait. That's a group characteristic. They all subscribe to this
Paul.
idea.
Welcome.
And clearly from the evidence, the
Paul.
primary control of these families, Angela, there's no doubt about it. She's the one, you heard her on it. I mean,
Oh, I
there's no doubt
understand,
about it. She's the
Allie.
one
You
who's
get some
control.
good rest, sweetie.
But you listened to those recordings from the summer of 2018. You actually had the aids that allowed you to kind of follow along. When it comes to the need to control the situation with Beth, the need to protect the children, the need to say how the household's going to be run, right down to who can and can't use the front door. Who's running the show? It's him. Man, on those recordings, it's him. He sounds just like Angela, just like her. He wants everyone to know that he's calling the shot. He wants everyone to know that he's making the rules with respect to things, how things are going to be with the kids and how they're going to be with the household. He even threatens Jake. I mean, he says, Jake, look, if you're not going to do what you need to do to protect the kid, I'm going to take it.
This is a good point because I think that, and I'm guilty of this too. Initially, I did believe that Jake was the favorite. But after I heard those 2018 wiretaps, I changed my mind because there was such a significant difference in the way that Angela interacts with Jake and George. And I feel like um, just Angela was always accusatory and angry with Jake, right? And at first I thought that that was because, the family did this big, huge, illegal, morally wrong thing, right? When they committed these crimes. And I thought that's where her anger was coming from. But actually, then I started thinking about it and paying a little bit closer attention and re-listening. And I actually think that this part is where I think the state is wrong. I actually think that the person that Angela was closest to was George. And I know that we skipped over this part, but George's attorney made a big deal about Angela not looking at George when she testified, as if she had disdain or contempt, or it was some level of guilt because she knew she was up there lying. And I actually don't think that's the case. I actually think that the reason she couldn't look George in the eye is there was guilt, but it was guilt because she was telling the truth and ratting him out, which is the antithesis of the way that George and Jake were raised. But when you listen to those wire taps and you do hear George repeat, I mean, almost verbatim what Angela had said to Jake just like an hour earlier. It's unsettling. And I think that what happened, this is what I think, and I've been thinking about this since I ended the live from this morning, but I actually think that in this scenario, the odd man out was actually Billy. I think that whenever Billy moved out of the house and started staying moved away from Bethel and wasn't staying at Peterson, he was staying at the Flying W. I think that George then stepped up and took Billy's place. And I think that is when Angela leaned on him more, and the two decision makers were Angela and George. But the true, from the outside looking in, but Angela, make no mistake about it, Angela was always pulling the strings. She just knew how to do it in such a way that George thought it was his idea. That's what I think. All right, here we go. Because this guy is in fuego and I don't want to interrupt him anymore because it's so good.
He's the one that had the control issue, just like Angela. Did you hear, it was hard to hear, but did you hear on that recording him manipulating Bullvine? After they crossed the border? Did you hear that? Bullvine, those people are bad people. They want to kill your dad. They want to kill your uncle. They want to kill your grandpa. That's what manipulation looks like. That's what control looks like. And he's just like Angela when it comes to that. I'm telling you, it's the same intent. It's a collective thought amongst them. And you heard those calls. There's no way Angela thought or was claiming that Sophie was being sexually abused back in the beginning of 2016. No way he's not involved. There's no way he's not putting his 2 cents. No way. If Jay and Billy are going to kill the rodents,
Corky, to answer you, I don't think so. I don't know. I think what she would have to do is, I think she would have to petition the court to have his rights severed. All right. And after that, then she could. And to be quite honest with you, I think that if Tabitha wanted to do that, I think that there is no judge that would side with George on that. I think any judge that heard her reasoning, and the case and what George did, I think that she would get his parental rights terminated, and then she could change his name, because I think that she should. If she, if that's an extra, that would be an extra measure of protection and anonymity for Bullvine. Bullvine is a very distinct name, and I honestly cannot fathom, no matter where they lived in the United States, that there would be another Bullvine in class. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, that's what I think. And this is another thing that always bothered me about about George and his testimony with respect to Angela. He really got up on that stand and for lack of a better word, just sort of dogged her out. And yet he didn't think highly of her as a person and really as a mother, except for she was in charge of taking care of Bullvine day to day. And if something ever happened to him, she was going to get custody. Like, why would you give custody to somebody of your child, the most precious thing you have in this world, right? To somebody that's the way you feel about them. That part never made sense to me. I wouldn't let Angela babysit a rock. That's just me.
There's no way George is sitting on the sidelines and letting out. Jake's apparently
All right.
and not naive. Through Bill George is the strong one. George is the good shot. George is the fighter. What were Angela's words? George loves Sophia. He wouldn't let anything happen to Sophia. We all wanted to protect Sophia. Do you think for 1 second the guy you heard on that recording is sitting this out? No way. No way. Let's use his words. Let's use his own words. He was coming, and he was bringing hell with him. This isn't the guy who sits on the sidelines. And we can call it custody, we can call it protection, but the bottom line is it was always about control. And guess what? For a year and a half after they slaughtered the rodents, they had it. They had exactly what they wanted. These children were being raised 100% Wagner. And now he wants to control the outcome of this case through his bogus stories. I want to take a few minutes and I want to talk to you about the why behind the deals with Jake and Angela. We talked about the deals, talked about how we gave them, but I want to talk about why. Mr. Parker brought it up. All right? The defendant wants you to believe that Jake's our star witness. The whole case rises or falls on Jake. Let me remind you, I don't need to remind you, let me remind you, we laid out about 6 weeks of testimony before we ever put Jake on the stand. And I know it was long. I know it was tedious. I know there had to be times where you were sitting there like, okay, just put Jake on the stand. We want to hear from Jake. But we did it this way on purpose. We wanted to show you the depth and the complexity of BCI's investigation. We wanted to show you that BCI, they didn't just lock in to the Wagners. They didn't just lock into the Wagners to the exclusion of everybody else. And if you remember, it wasn't even until about September of 2016 that the Wagners really even popped up on the radar screen. That we really started to ask about, hey, we're going to have to rule these guys out. And there were a couple things that happened in September of 2016. They were like, uh-oh, this is kind of a red flag. The first was Jeff Hackett and Charlie Gilly both independently told BCI that Billy was telling them stories about why the rodents got killed. And do you remember? He told both of them independently said, Billy told me that he and Chris were involved in a drug deal with Skid Montgomery. And we cut him out, and that's why Chris got murdered. Now, again, you heard investigators, well, this is kind of interesting, all right, for a couple reasons. First of all, because they independently told the same story. And second of all, they're like, if he's telling people that he and Chris were involved in a deal where they cut Skid Montgomery out, and Chris's entire family ends up slaughtered, but Billy's doesn't have a scratch on it? Well, that's kind of interesting. And it was interesting enough that, again, we're like, let's talk to Billy. And again, September 2016, you heard the recording of when they talked to Billy. I talked to him out in the parking lot up there, and a couple interesting things stand out in that interview. Number one, he lied about his phone activity. Point blank lie, all right? He told you, when they were trying to get his phone, they wanted to get the phone that he had after the homicide. He said, oh, I don't have that anymore, I broke it. And do you remember why he said he broke it? I broke it because Chris and I were best friends. And after the murder, I just kept accidentally calling him. And I just got mad one day because he was dead, and I kept calling him, and I smashed that phone. Well, we go and look at the phone records. And guess what? There's not a single call from Billy to Chris after the homicides. So we're like, that's interesting. The next thing is, we look at phone records. Our analysts look at phone records. And you can see those couple of calls to Billy, from Chris to Billy the night of the homicide. And they go unanswered. But the next morning, Billy gets up and right away, he calls his voicemail. And after he calls his voicemail, again, even though Chris's calls went to voicemail, there's no calls to Chris. And we know he wouldn't have known about the murders at least for a couple hours in the morning. So your best friend in the world is calling you rapid fire the night before. It's going to voicemail. You pick up the phone and you don't call it. Why? Well, because you know he's dead. You know he's dead. Another interesting thing he said in that first interview is he gave the investigators really the first look at why all 8 of the rodents might have been killed. And you heard Agent Scheider talk a little bit about their investigation. They just couldn't. One of the things they couldn't figure out is why all 8. I mean, you could see, okay, if Chris and Kenneth get killed, they're both growing marijuana. Maybe it has something to do with that. If for one reason or other somebody's targeted down at Dana, well, why go all the way out to Kenneth? And it just wasn't add up as to why all 8 were wiped out in one night. But during that interview, Billy tells the investigators, hey, look, you're going to fight one rodent, you fight them all. And all of a sudden, he's like, well, wait a second. Maybe I had to wipe them out to prevent retribution or retaliation. And that's the first time that really kind of started to play into the picture. The other thing he did is he gives the same basic story that Charlie Gilley and Jeff Tackett told about the Skid Montgomery deal, except for he leaves himself out this time. He leaves himself out of the story. He didn't say anything about him being involved in or being in danger. And what you saw, again, based on that interview, the way we do things, or the way they do things, is they rule people out. They look for ways to rule people out so they're not suspects anymore. And after that interview, like, we can't rule them out. As a matter of fact, we probably ought to keep looking at it. So through the fall of 16 and winter 17, you heard testimony about the investigators, the analysts looking into the Wagners and trying to find something, anything, that allowed them to rule them out as suspects. And again, through that time, they weren't necessarily classified as targets or suspects at that point, but they certainly weren't ruled out either. And some of the things that you heard that they looked at, Facebook records, and they saw, hey, the way the Wagners are telling us everything's just rosy with custody doesn't play out. It's not the same thing we're seeing in these Facebook records. And you heard about the tower dump. Again, I'm just gonna have to talk about it. But the first time in 2016 that Billy spent the night at Peterson Road was the night of the murder. Oh, which reminds me, an opening statement, they said, hey, he didn't know anything about these murders. He wakes up the next morning and everything's just normal. Everything's just normal, everything's fine. Guess what? It wasn't normal. His dad was there. His dad had spent the night. And that stands out to investigators. They're like, that's suspicious. And again, you hear that this type of evidence causes these investigators to continue to look at the Wagners. And eventually you heard about them getting the search warrants. And eventually you heard about them downloading the phones. And what you see is, as a result of that, they recovered the shell casings from Peterson Road that were fired from the same gun that killed the Rodents. And at that point, now they're in the crosshairs. At that point, when you find shell casings that match shell casings from the scene, you better believe you're a suspect at that point. And that's when, again, I'm not going to go, Ms. Knapp covered this yesterday, I'm not going to go through all the other evidence that they recovered at about that time. But again, it was clear at that point that they were suspects in the investigation turned towards the Wagners. Now, the reason I wanted to recap all of that with you was to show you that BCI had the Wagners, they had them long before Jake ever comes forward. The evidence that BCI recovered had all of them as complicitors. It did. It had each and every one of them. Angela says, I bought the shoes for my boys. There's 2 different shoe prints in the scene, right? That type of evidence had all of them participating, or at least complicit, in these homicides. And again, 99% of the evidence that you've heard in the course of this trial, that you've heard over the last couple of months, 99% of that evidence was recovered from the hard work, the dedication, the tenacity of BCI investigators, BCI analysts, BCI scientists. It was good old-fashioned police work, not the cooperation of Jake and Angela. Jake Wagner is not the state's, he's not our star witness. He's a terrible, terrible human being. He's evil. And he's going to spend the rest of his miserable existence locked in a cage. He's going to spend the rest of his life separated from what means most to him, his family. He will never be free again. And as incredibly distasteful as it was, the state entered into an agreement with Jake for one reason. We needed one thing from him: guns. That's what we needed from him. Him leading us to those guns was incredibly important. Do you know why? Yes, you saw it. You saw some of it in the questions that they were asking about the drugs. And there was a lot of emphasis early on when we were doing the scenes about the drugs.
Night,
at the scene.
Corky. Thanks for coming.
You heard about it again when they talked about.
Okay, so this is an important part. And this is something that has to be explained to the jury because the defense has made such a fuss about this deal, right? This deal between Angela and Jake, and that they have a motive to lie, and in a way they're right. However, and this is kind of where I was thinking there was going to be some reasonable doubt that came in, right? But then when Mr. Wilson here lays it all out and explains it, and then you think about the time. So they were arrested. All of the Wagners were arrested November 13th, 2018. Okay. Jake didn't make his deal with the prosecution until April 16th of 2021. And then Angela was like 4 or 5 months, I think, after Jake's. But the only people aside from the prosecution, the state, and Jake's attorneys, or it's not Jake's, well, yeah, Jake's attorneys that know what was in that proffer are George's attorneys. Angela's attorneys and Angela herself never heard or saw the proffer. The reason that George did, obviously, is because the rules of discovery dictate that they have to turn that kind of stuff over. So George's attorneys know what Angela said, and George's attorneys know what Jake said. But Angela doesn't know what Jake said, and Jake doesn't know what Angela said. And that is very important, and the jury needed to hear that. And I'm glad that Mr. Wilson cleared that up, because Angela explained it yesterday a lot of it, but he does it better, and that's just the fact.
Skid McGunn.
Much better
The reason
explanation.
we needed those guns was because of the drugs. The Wagner's defense, from the moment they ended this homicide, the Wagner's defense was going to be that the rodents were killed because of Chris's drug activity. It's the reason he lied to the investigators at the border. They couldn't put Billy in it because that question would be asked. Well, why wasn't Billy killed too? Again, the reason Billy was running around town telling people about this drug deal. Their defense in this case was going to be, look, as a family, we didn't have any problem with the rodents. Everything was fine with Jake and Hannah over Sophia. Custody, there was no custody problem here at all. We loved Hannah. We loved her like a daughter. We loved her like a sister. Chris was Dad's best friend. Frankie was my best friend. We were their 4th of July parties. And we would never hurt theirs.
I'm going to
Chris
skip
had
forward
to be
just a little
murdered
bit, you
because
guys. I have
the
to.
family had to be murdered because of Chris's drug deal. That had to be what happened.
Oh, wait. Wait, hold on. I might have skipped forward too much. My bad.
Really pronounced on the first day. When Mr. Parker would ask him softball type questions, questions about hunting, questions about
Yeah, this is the part I want to get to. Hold on.
Fixing diesel engines. Oh, here's another one. You should see him drag a deer. Who's dragging those bodies? It's this guy. And when Jake comes back down, again, he goes in. probably says, hey, did you guys get the phones? Hey, we got to get the phones. Goes back in to look for evidence. While he's in there, actually on his way to the back, that's when he steps in the blood. Defendant at this point, he's already stepped in the blood and left his size 11s in there. Jake goes in, goes to the back, grabs those phones. He says the bodies were covered at that point. All right? You know you're covering the bodies at that point to hide them. All right? Just in case anybody kind of looks in or.
I want to say one last thing. Well, not one last thing, but for a while, just this thing. There is an element about the shoes that has always sort of like nagged at me at the back of my mind. And I said this morning, but it's still bothering me and I haven't gotten resolution for it. Okay. So the prosecution's theory is this, that the tennis shoes that were purchased at Walmart were purchased exclusively for Jake and George. And they have corroborating evidence. They've got the video from inside of Walmart. They've got the receipt that was found in the trailer. And they've got video from the parking lot of Walmart where you can see Angela, Jake, and George in the vehicle. All right. And obviously, George is a lying liar mouth when he says he didn't ever know anything about those shoes, because Angela's excuse back in 2017, when she was confronted with the shoes and that evidence, was, I bought them for my boys. They saw them. They didn't like them. I threw them. Which is interesting to me because I didn't realize how much Angela talked about money. And granted, these shoes weren't like, it's like she went out and bought Jordans or anything like that, something like crazy expensive, but still, if you're tight on money, every little bit helps. So why not return them? But my fundamental problem is, and this is something that has not been answered and I haven't been able to find it yet, is the shoe sizes. Everybody's feet were measured. Everybody's. George's, Billy's, Jake's, some of the Rodens, some of the Manleys, they were all, this was a big element, these shoe prints, right? But what neither side has ever said that I've heard, and I might be wrong, I'll have to go back and look, but neither one of them has said outright what size shoe Billy wore and what size shoe George wore. Like, Billy was a lot taller than Jake for sure, and a little bit taller than George, but significantly heavier than both of them, actually. George definitely was a pork chop, but Billy was the pork chop and the loin. Like, he's a chunker. And but I was just always curious about that. Like, the defense has never said, well, how do we know that they were for George aside from Angela, right? Because George and Billy wear the same size shoe. They've never said that, which I always thought was interesting. So they must obviously not wear the same size shoe. But I just never heard it stated outright what size shoe Billy and George actually wear. That just, I don't know. Just one of those things. Okay, sorry.
You're covering those bodies. It's not a pattern of behavior. This is about covering up what you've done. So those bodies are covered up. He goes through. He pulls the phones. Right. While he does that, all right, he doesn't know what's going on outside. And again, you heard the testimony about, in these situations, time can either run slower or faster. You don't know how long he was in there. All right. His recall of how long it takes wouldn't be accurate based on what we know about the science of these traumatic situations. But what we do know is that while he was in there, either Billy or George went up to the grow room. Right? At this point, they're probably looking for the marijuana. Hey, is there marijuana, is there money, or something else up there that I can get? They'd already got the DVR. But how do we know that it was one of those two? Again, Mr. Parker's right. It's Gary's blood on the door. But how do we know it was one of those two? The door handles broke off. They broke the door handle off to get in. They actually forced their way into that one. Jake didn't have to force his way in. He had the keys. One of those two goes up to that room to grab whatever else they were interested in going up there while Jake's inside grabbing those phones. And they leave the smudge here. And again, the way you know that is because they broke the door to get in there. So, again, that's scene one. Oh, one of the things he said about scene 3.
Okay, Allie.
He said that Hannah looked at it, and he pulled the trigger, and he shot. And again, their expert testified about recall and memory and tunnel vision, all that kind of stuff. He thought he shot her in the face here.
Oh, I'll
Did you hear
check
when he
those
testified?
out,
He was
Mrs.
constipated. He said a
M.
couple times. When I got to her, I noticed there wasn't any blood, like in her hairline.
Your pets are all
He
tangled.
acted surprised because he literally thought he had shot her in the face. I'm telling you, when she gasps, she sees that, she does one of these numbers, and she takes that shot right in the back of the first shot in the back of the head. That's what happened with respect to Hannah May. One of the other things he talked about, when I say he, I'm talking about Mr. Parker, he talked about George's interview in Montana. And asked, well, why didn't we hear that? Why didn't we play that? Look, it's a strategic move on our part. If we play that interview for you, he never has to take the stand to explain himself. All right? He's never subject to cross-examination. We never get a shot at asking him questions. He gets to sit back and listen to the interview. We don't play that, and the only way he can get his story or what he's trying to say in front of you is by taking that stand and subjecting himself to cross-examination. That's why you do something like that. It's a strategic move. But again, when he was on the stand and he talked about the interview in Montana, he admitted that he said the things that Mr. Neville was asking him. He admitted. He admitted that he said that he went to bed at 12 or 12:30. He admitted, again, that he lied when they asked him about what kind of truck that he had. He admitted that he said probably 15 times, no way anybody's leaving that house without me knowing. So he admitted to the things that he said in Montana. He was just subject to cross-examination and doing it. Oh, here's another one real quick. Mr. Parker asked you about the truck and the bed of the truck, the fact that we rebuilt the bed of that truck. And he asked why we didn't ask, or why we waited so late to do that, is basically what it was. And again, that's what he asked. He asked why we didn't do that before the trial. We had a problem for a year and a half. Why didn't we do it before the trial? Again, we get in the trial, and all of a sudden they start asking questions that make it pretty clear that they're going to argue that he was too big to fit in the back of that truck. All right? Out of the blue, that's where that came from. So again, real easy. What do? We want to cut that argument off. We just go and rebuild it exactly like Jake said. Only we actually got people who were bigger because we didn't want any wiggle room. We didn't want them to dispute the size of the people that we used. And what did it show you? No problem at all. And did you know that these guys got in there? No problem at all. They got in, got out. There was no problem at all. And did you notice that after we did that, after we put that evidence in, they kind of backed off asking those types of questions. They kind of backed off the impossibility that he would have never been able to fit into that truck. They backed off that line of attack. He talked about the goose box. And he told you that that goose box was put in that lake for their grandfather's birthday, which is in February. You heard both Jake and Angela testify that it was either for Father's Day or for Grandpa's birthday. But what they both said was that somebody went in the water. Jake said, I got in the water. Mom said somebody went in the water. All right. So we know it wasn't February. All right. You're not going to sit in the water in February and put that goose box in. So we know it was in warm weather. But what's even more interesting, it's proof again of the independent cooperation that Angela gave to Jake's statement. Because she wouldn't have known. How would she have known that Jake said that? Unless it was true. So that shows you that that box was actually put in that lake when it was warm. Mr. Parker talked about demeanor. And he talked about judging Jake's demeanor. He talked about the fact that, about his idiosyncrasies when he testified. And you can, certainly, when you're judging credibility, one of the things you look at is the appearance and demeanor of a witness when they testify. You also look at what they said, the substance of what they said. Now, Ms. Canepa, she talked a long time yesterday about what George said when he testified and the lies that he told when he testified. I want to talk to you very briefly about his appearance and demeanor. All right? Look, the truth is the truth. And when you're telling the truth, there's no reason to practice or to be coached on what you're saying or what your answer should be. It should just flow out of your mouth. When the defendant testified, he gave you a couple obvious clues that he had practiced his answers, that he'd been coached on his answers. And think about his testimony. Right? Think about what you saw when he was testifying. And think about whether or not anything stood out to you. And as I ask questions, don't answer them. Just think about it. Just think about it rhetorically. First of all, did any of you notice that when George was testifying, he literally was answering the questions before Mr. Parker was done asking them. Now, not only was he answering them, but he was putting the answers in the correct context before Mr. Parker had even finished framing the context of the question. Now, how do you do that? How do you do that unless you practice on what your answer is going to be? And the better reason, and the better question is, why do you do that unless your answer is something other than the truth? The second thing that I want to ask is, did any of you notice that the defendant was giving very specific answers to very vague questions?
Okay, I have to interject for a commentary for fair use. I actually sort of disagree with Mr. Wilson's opinion on George being coached. So the thing is, most people under normal circumstances, right, aren't prepared to take the stand in their own defense against 8 counts of red rum, right? So then you have George, all right? And yeah, did George pull an Ezra McCandless? Absolutely, he did. Ezra did the same thing. She answered questions before her attorney was even finished answering or asking, excuse me. And that is indicative of a person who has been coached. But people are coached for multiple reasons. When you have a person like George Wagner, who is not a highly talkative, communicative person, right? You do need to prep him. I think that Mr. Wilson saying that the only reason to coach or prep a witness is because they're lying. And that's not true. People do it in all kinds of situations, including civil litigation. Sometimes you just need to people don't understand how it is to testify until they actually testify, and they're not prepared really for cross-examination, and that's where the real prep comes in. So do I think that George memorized the answers to the questions? Probably a little bit, yes. Is that indicative in and of itself of lying? No. What's indicative of the fact that George is lying is the fact that his timeline and his statements directly contradict the evidence, especially those audio tapes. So that I'm not gonna I don't put a whole lot of weight in that part of it, but yeah.
Mr. Parker would ask a question, something like, well, tell me about that one time with Cabby at Pearson Road, or tell me about that one time at Bethlehem. Now look, that's the type of question that provides very little contextual clues about exactly what's being asked. But the defendant was always able to give incredibly specific answers.
Also, this not
were right in line with whatever Mr. Parker was saying.
Actually, that's not 100% accurate either. There were a lot of times when Mr. Parker asked questions like that were sort of vague and kind of open-ended. And George actually asked, do you want me to talk about this or do you want me to talk about that? What would you like to know? George actually asked a question. So I do feel that this is a little bit mischaracterization, but I also think that George is a lying liar, mouth who tells lies. And I think I think there are parts of his testimony, like the hunting and stuff like that, stuff that had nothing to do with the crime, that he was telling the truth about. But on the whole, his testimony with respect to his involvement or lack thereof in this crime, I think that was a lie.
Same 2 questions. How do you do that unless you rehearse? And why do you need to rehearse or practice unless your answer is something other than the truth? And finally, did anyone notice the defendant's body language? Or did anyone notice the defendant's body language when he would make denials about his participation in crime? Okay. Now, Chris Newcomb said that George wasn't much of a gambler. And Juliet's like, she went through all his records, and she couldn't find anything that showed that he was a gambler, that he played cards or anything like that. And it's a good thing, because he's got a terrible tell when he's bluffing or he's not being truthful. And I'm insanely curious as to whether or not you noticed it. It was pronounced on the first day. It was really pronounced on the first day. When Mr. Parker would ask him softball-type questions, questions about hunting, questions about deer stands, questions about cars, questions about, fixing diesel engines, the defendant, eye contact, both of them, answering the question. Yes, 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 no, 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 right eye contact, nonstop. But when Mr. Parker would ask him something about his knowledge or participation in the murders, he would look straight down before he answered the question. Every time, like clockwork. It was his body, that's his body movement betraying what he's trying to make the answer to be. Look, in judging a person's credibility, you'll get an instruction that allows you to apply the normal test.
All concerning the case, either as to the facts or as to the law, from any source.
I was talking and I didn't unmute. That's pretty much it. I mean, there's not much more to the closing arguments. That it was all relevant, but just, and it's 11 o'clock almost. It's a school night, kids. We can't be up till all hours of the night. This old lady can't make it anymore. But yeah, so at this point, the trial or the jury it's been turned over to the jury, although because they're not being sequestered and they have to report back, I actually don't think that they are deliberating tonight. I think that they're actually going to start deliberating tomorrow. And like I said at the beginning of the stream, I think that we should have a verdict late Thursday or early Friday. That's my prediction. I can't see it being any sooner than that, particularly because, first of all, there's 22 counts, okay? But in the most serious counts, which would be the 8 counts of murder, there are special circumstances and there's parts that they have to figure out. So I think that it's going to take a little bit of time. So as far as tomorrow goes, now, there is another. Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for being here, Amelia. There is another case that I've been watching, and it's out of, my home state of Texas. And I'm actually quite fascinated about it because it's a serial killer case. But there's parts of it that I don't quite understand. Like a lot of the crimes are committed on the same day, although they're not, the victims are not connected, which is what really makes a serial killer, right? Multiple victims who are not connected. But he was a border patrol officer, and I am I'm very interested in that case. So, but there's something else that I'm thinking about too. So after I ended the live today, I had this really cool idea for a video that sort of sums up this case, and but it's going to take some time to put together. So I was debating and wanted to know how many of you guys are interested in Texas versus Ortiz, and if you guys wanted to watch that, I would be more than happy to stream it and just work on the video a little bit here and there until it's done after the morning session. Or if we want to, because tomorrow night I really want to talk about this probable cause affidavit. Okay, I'll do it. I'll do it in the morning. So tomorrow morning I'll stream Ortiz and we'll watch that. Now we're going to be coming in on, this will be day 3. Court started Monday. So we'll come in on it live, and, not tomorrow night, but maybe like Thursday night, we'll do like a catch up. So everybody is up to speed on that. But I really want to go over the probable cause affidavit for Delphi, excuse me. I want to talk a little bit about what's going on in the Idaho 4 case. And also I want to talk a little bit about Quentin Simon. So I think tomorrow night will be just, and then I'll just probably throw in a little, we won't watch any of it, but I'll like break down the case against Ortiz also. So then, and then we'll have like a catch up night Thursday where we actually watch the testimony, I think that's what we'll do. And then I'll just work on this Wagner video in between. And yeah, so that's what we'll do. All right. So thank you guys all for being here. I appreciate it so much. You don't know, your support means the world to me. The fact that you guys come in here every night and you listen to me and let me like jibber jabber about these trials, because I find them to be absolutely fascinating. And it's very rare that I am pressed to find a counter argument or a loophole from this, either the state's argument or the defense's argument. But I have to say that Mr. Wilson's rebuttal closing argument, I was very hard pressed to find a counter argument to his argument. And that's rare. I usually can find something. So I thought he did an excellent job, really, at the end there, summarizing this whole case and the important facts of evidence that the jury should consider. And I thought that Mr. Parker, for his part, he did a good job too. He did raise some reasonable doubt, but Mr. Wilson was better, and he shut that reasonable doubt almost all the way down. There's probably a tiny sliver of a crack of reasonable doubt, but I do. Thank you, Amelia. I be trying. But yeah, it's all. I think he. There's a very tiny sliver of a crack, but I really think when the jury gets back there and deliberates and starts really going through the evidence, listening to those wiretaps and stuff like that, I think that crack is going to be shut. So I will see you guys all tomorrow. Just keep an eye out. So Texas is an hour behind us. They're on Central. So for me, it'll be probably I don't know, 9:50 Eastern, since they're behind. But just be on the lookout sometime around 9 o'clock. We'll, Eastern time, just in case. But anyway, that's what we'll do. So thank you guys again for being here. I appreciate it tremendously. If you haven't done so already, give your girl a thumbs up. It's a free way to support the channel, and it helps me out. And I will see all of you guys tomorrow. Have a great rest of your Tuesday. And Mike. Guess what day it is? Hump day. And I'll see y'all tomorrow on Hump Day. And I'll do that again tomorrow. All right. Good night, you guys. Stay safe out there on these YouTube streets, and the real ones. I hear that the YouTube streets are on fire tonight. So stay safe. All right. Good night, you guys. Bye.